to introduce our consumer advocate, Mr. Geoff Thomas OAM, who I've been working with in the field of motor neuron disease now for the last few years. And Geoff has lost his wife, Mary, to motor neuron disease in 2013. And he's always talked about the friendship circles that he has and wanted to do more research on this. And then, boom, I told him about compassionate communities. And he said, is that the same thing? So, Geoff, you've got 5 minutes to wow the audience with your experience and your reflection on what you've heard now.
Well, thank you, Samar, and I share people's praise for you and your work in this area. In fact, folks, I'm so impressed that I've already booked Samar to speak at my funeral. She's friendship groups, whether they're the same as compassionate communities, I don't know. I'll leave that to you to judge. Maybe one's part of the other. But my comments refer to the management of well-being of people, in this case, my wife with MND, and I am working with MND associations across Australia in this area. I'm assuming that in my case, it's a terminal illness for which there was no treatment or cure, and like Alan Keller has said, we're one of the 95% that decided to do this journey entirely at home. If I had to name two areas which are important during this journey, I'd say the carer, because the carer and the patient really become one in the management of this thing, and the other is the friendship groups, partly because you're staying at home and within the community. And they're important during the entire journey from diagnosis right through to death. Both are areas which are undercooked in research. We know that, and thanks to Julian Abel for indicating why he thought that was the case within the current research paradigms. But folks, I'm not going to go on with that area because I know how annoyed it makes Samar feel, and we don't want to start throwing things. So my observations on friendship groups would be these. They already exist, of course. They've established relationships, interests, communications. They have strong focus on sharing, on support, and on compassion. So if you look at it within the context of what we've been talking about today, they're obviously ready to go. But are they? If you look at a diagnosis of something like MND, and I suggest to you that grief, the process of grief, starts with the diagnosis. If there's no hope of cure or treatment, you know, that is really the death sentence. So grief starts at that point. And we observed that these friendship groups of people, they were shocked, they were concerned, they didn't know how to deal with their emotions. They wanted to help, but were confused. Some even withdrew. Others showed pity, many too much pity, because that's one of the things that people who are in this situation don't want. And many were overgenerous, particularly when it came to food. During the middle of this journey, if I'd been given one more pot of soup or one more damn casserole, I would have gone mad. And all of this continues, of course, as the condition gets worse. They see the changes, and it gets worse, of course, again, if there is cognitive change, which was the case with my wife. So to me, the end of life in our case was really just part of the grief continuum, which went on for 4 years. But I suggest to you, in this case, it was grief touched with relief. In fact, at the time that Mary died, in front of me in my presence, I didn't know whether to burst into tears or to skip down the corridor. And that made it even more complex in terms of managing that grief process. So if we're to make these friendship groups part of the support structure, as I'm sure we all want to do, what do we need to do it? Well, firstly, we need, I think as you've been suggesting, we need to recognise the recognition that these groups have a major part to play in the management of wellbeing. It'd be nice if those that are funding support for people that need care were to realise this, such as you'll have an NDIS will support a carer to come into the home, but we've got this great network of people that don't get any support for training or whatever. So it would seem to me, and I'm involved in some policy work, that if the government really wanted to make an impact, this would be a good way to start. We need to understand the role of the friendship groups from their own perspective, the patients, the health professionals, the allied health professionals, and everything else, because sometimes this area can get pretty cluttered. We need to provide support and make them part of the journey. We need to be indicating to them how things are going to change and what to expect. We need to make them feel valued, obviously. But we need to watch overkill. As I said before, there can be too much pity, interference, all being well-meaning, when what the patient and the carers really want is to continue life as normal as possible for as long as possible. So who do we get to provide this support? Well, you can look at the M&D clinics or whatever for argument's sake. They're largely involved with medical stuff and don't have time for this. We have M&D associations and advisors, yes, fine, but they don't have the skills frequently and are reluctant to move out of the areas of work which they're engaged in. Because getting into the grief space is a pretty tough gig and requires very special skills. So who do we get? It seems to me that we have a raft of people out there in the community, many of whom have lived experience, with some training we could use as advisors, mentors, prompters, encouragers to get on with this sort of work and work with the community. In my own case, I do a lot of this. It is, strange as it might sound, an essential component of my grieving process. So, some answer questions.